Hello, everyone. It is Jennie and Laurie. We are here today to talk about the very exciting Sagittarius full moon that happens in the wee hours of June 11th. What time does that happen, Jennie? Just in case I want to get up and go outside and look at it at the exact moment.
3:43 a.m.
And that's in Eastern time zone, so you want to adjust that for where you are.
So it might be a different day for you. So tune into that.
It's true.
Yeah. So this is well, let me also say this real quick. This is the full moon to the new moon that happened on May 26th at 6 degrees of Gemini. And this is in the bigger cycle, we had a Sagittarius new moon way back in December, December 1st, Sagittarius new moon. Now we have this Sagittarius full moon. So those are two dates to keep in mind. And then we kind of forgot to introduce more about ourselves. So did you want to say a little more about that or?
Well, for those of you who are new here, please check out below here in the show notes and go visit us at our websites. We have a lot of offerings available, and please like and share and follow us here on YouTube so more people will see us. And I think that's all we need to say at the moment.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
I like that you brought up the two separate cycles. It's really important to think about that. A lot of times, we think about the short cycle and it's like, okay, 2 weeks ago we had the new moon and what started then is now fully illuminated. That's a pretty short cycle.
Yeah.
There's not a lot in my life that happens in 2 weeks unless it's, yeah. At any rate, the longer cycle, thinking back to what I began on December 1st, that's always more useful to me to think about what began in December that now I get to see the full results of. And from that illuminated understanding, can make whatever adjustments are needed in that particular process.
Yeah, it certainly dovetails better with life experience, because when you're talking about the shorter cycle, I mean, the shorter cycle is awesome because it's the moon and you can watch the moon and it disappears at the new moon and then it starts to grow and then it becomes that nice, like, half light, half dark, which is I always like to see that. It really suggests a crossroads, and then the light's still growing and you have your full moon. And just as Laurie says, that's when you see the results of the process that began. And then the second half of the cycle really is about what's the meaning of all of it? How do you integrate it into your life? The waning half, moon. So the second, or excuse me, the last quarter moon there, that's a time to really think about, what have you learned? How does this fit into your life? What new things, can that suggest for the future? And then that very last part, you're just letting it all go, and allowing the cycle to begin again. So it's a really nice framework. It's something we forget. We tend to live in this like linear way of thinking that it's a checklist and that you just move on. But when you think about the moon cycles, it really allows you to see how things build. And then there's like a waning phase to it. And then there's an opportunity to let go and to, begin again. And there's something very refreshing about that, I think.
I love listening to you talk about the moon phases, Jenny, and it reminds me to remind those who are listening to follow Jenny. Go to her website, hiddenpathastrology.com, and follow her because she writes a really beautiful piece for each of the new moon, the first quarter, the full moon, the last quarter, and they're really useful. I think a lot of the reason that we forget to follow the moon is that so many of us live in urban areas where you don't see the moon. When you live in a place that's really dark and you really are aware of the moon phases a lot more, and it really enables you to tie your life in more naturally, more easily. But if you make the effort,
Yeah.
you can do it just the same. I
Yeah.
was up on the coast, way, way up in northern Vermont this last weekend, and I was so aware that it was the new moon. It was so dark. There was just like blackness at night, and it was just so awesome. It's such a different kind of rest when you're in that dark phase. And now here we are coming into the full light. It's a very
Yeah.
powerful thing.
I like to hear you talk about it that way because it does imply when we're in a dark moon, it's time to kind of let things settle and come to rest. And even the new moon is, when you put the seed in the soil and you cover it back over, so you still don't know what's going to happen. There's an act of faith that needs to happen at that new moon, and I really like that. And then the full moon is just this time for celebration. It's bright at night. It's like daylight at night. It's time to really celebrate. And I think this Sagittarius full moon in particular is a very important time to really celebrate the rich tapestry of life. Like life
Mm,
is complicated. There's a lot happening. There are global shifts. There are personal shifts, and this full moon is really inviting us to just celebrate all of it, to just
mhm,
say, this is what it is. There's tension over here, there's growth over here, and then there's like this really fun, like active energy over here, and like just to take all of it into this, moment, because again, the full moon really is only a moment. That's
right.
kind of it gets spread out over a few days on either side because it's so bright, but it really is a time to say, okay, let's have a laugh, let's tell some stories. I really think there's a lot of relishing life, enjoying the meaning of things at the Sagittarius full moon. In a way, it's kind of simple with some complex layers.
Right,
Yeah.
absolutely. And we want to bring a lot of humor to it.
Yes. Yeah. And speaking of that, do you want to talk more about Sagittarius itself before we jump in
Oh,
or to the chart?
sure. What's Sagittarius about? Sagittarius is about expansion. It is the mutable fire sign. It's ruled by Jupiter. It really speaks to our higher understanding of philosophical matters and growth and expansion and travel, all the things that just open our minds and our understanding of the world. There's
Nice.
a lot that we can say about Sagittarius. What do you want to say?
Well, I like thinking. I mean, it's one of the three fire signs. You have Aries, which is the fire sign that starts everything. So that's the kindling. When you light the match and whoomp, up it goes. Leo's the hearth fire. Now you have this great big fire, is burning steady and bright and strong, and everybody wants to gather around it and have a good time. And then when you come to Sagittarius, that's like at the end of the fire, you have these coals, burning down, and it's the time when you start sharing those deeper secrets, you start sharing the wisdom of things in life, and your stories have more meaning. I also really like thinking about coals in the sense that if you think about carrying the fire from place to place, so in the long, 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 long time ago, when you didn't want to have to restart a fire every time, you had people that carried the coal, and
Mm,
they put it in leaves and so on and so forth and carried the coal to the next fire. And I think that's the perfect way to think about Sagittarius. It's the
mm,
fire that is brought from place to place. So it brings in travel, it brings in, higher education, like
mm,
a more profound wisdom to it. And it also takes some ingenuity, right? To figure out how the hell do you carry this hot coal, in an old days, like how was that done? And just to put some creativity into it like that. And there's a little bit of risk associated with it too. There's a little bit of a daring. You're carrying fire with you, like that's pretty risky. So it kind of brings in all of those pieces, and I enjoy that about Sagittarius. So
One other thing I just want to add, because I always think about, at the end of the night when the fire's down to coals, there's something about that pile of hot coals. You look into it and it feels like you can see the universe. You know, I
totally,
always think of that. There's some
yeah,
higher I don't know. There's something about that that always makes me feel expanded. When I was a little kid, I remember looking into the coals and seeing whole cities in there. It's what I always thought of was big cities. Anyway,
oh, beautiful. I
Sagittarius.
love
It's
that.
yeah, it really is about expanding understanding and expanding playfulness. I often, if you watch all our videos, you've heard me talk about the centaur, the image that I have in my head of the centaur coming to the crossroad with an arrow, one going in each direction, one saying enlightenment, the direction is to enlightenment, and the other saying to Gary's party. And that whole idea of, Sagittarius really wants expansion and expansion into fun and play and just having a good time
Yeah.
is different, but attached to this expansion of wisdom and understanding. You kind of have to embrace both. And at this particular full moon, I think really embracing both of those directions
Yeah.
is so available to us.
Yeah. And you're making me think too, just one other piece that popped in my mind here is you got to think about where Sagittarius is. It's sandwiched between Scorpio and Capricorn in the
Mm.
zodiac wheel. And so it has a tinge of that darkness that, its job is to kind of light the darkness up that Scorpio brings you to, those deeper ruminations. And then Capricorn's so serious that Sagittarius is like, well, we better have a party because things are going to get serious. So when you think about its placement between those two, and you can think about that with any sign. What's the connection? It's sitting next to those two signs. So how do there's a little bit of bleeding over into each other, in a sense. And so that's a helpful way to think about zodiac in general. So yeah.
I love how you said that. We got to party quick before the seriousness sets in.
For real. Um, hey, so should we look at the chart? You ready
Yeah,
for
let's
that?
let's do that. Let's move on.
Let's do it. All right. So here we have, again, this is the chart of the moment. So we're not going to go super crazy deep into this chart, but we just want you to see what it looks like, the moment that the moon is full. And see, get out some little, like, so first of all, we have the full moon right here. There we go. There's that. So we're in Gemini season. So I always think about Gemini and the polarity with Sagittarius. Gemini gathers the information. So the sort of hunt for information has been on since the sun moved there, on, I think it was on May 20th.
Yeah.
And you've been gathering all this data. And then at the full moon, you get to have an understanding of the meaning of all that data. How does that data come together into a big picture? And that's what the full moon is, sort of illuminating. It's like, great, glad you gathered the data, but what's the meaning of all of it? And it gives you this moment to just have a laugh, tell a story, look at the bigger meaning of all these things. So that's the first thing for me.
Yeah. And my mind immediately, when I first opened this, I immediately look at that combination of the two rulers. The ruler of Sagittarius is Jupiter, the ruler of Gemini is Mercury, and they are closely together here in Cancer. And that's one of the big reasons in my mind in looking at this that this celebration of this moment really wants to bring in our voice, our conversation on a level of humor and expansion.
Hmm. I know. I love
Jupiter
those.
always makes me think about humor.
Yeah. Yeah. And then next to Mercury, well, Mercury carries the trickster energy too,
Right.
and then it's the voice. So you put the two together, and it really is a moment to, I mean, really rejoice. There's a revelry in here. And what are we rejoicing? Well, those two are in Cancer. So what we're doing here is we're layering in the emotional connection.
Mhm.
With Cancer, you have a water sign, and you can think a lot about the bonding, the
Mm.
deep bonding that can happen with people. So that kind of adds to the picture of, yeah, you're telling a story, having a laugh, but there's a deeper
Yeah.
layer to it. There's a deeper bonding that is happening. And humor is such a great way to connect with other people. And so this is a real encouragement. Just find the humor in things,
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
that. So
And
that's,
then there is a little bit of a complication here with Saturn and Neptune. Saturn's just recently gone into Aries, Neptune pretty recently as well. But there is a square between them. And to me, that just suggests that this humor and this conversation and this connecting through humor and conversation cannot leave reality behind, cannot leave the struggles that we're all embroiled in right now behind. It has to include that and recognize that that is part of what we're in the middle of. It's not like, oh, we're going to engage in this humor and pretend everything is wonderful and beautiful and delightful. No, we are doing it almost in spite of, or almost because it helps us navigate these more difficult um, things that are happening in our world and in our personal lives.
yeah. And I mean, also just showing that, change is necessary, and it's very challenging and difficult, and it may not feel like it's all going in the right direction. I mean, and from my perspective, that's not necessarily true, but change is complicated. There's a chaos to it. There's an unpredictability to it. But this full moon is a little bit like, see what you can in the good of it, like the
Mhm.
good of the change. And that square to Saturn and Neptune, it really represents, well, with Saturn, it's a reality check. And
Mhm.
then when you add Neptune, it really adds in, well, what really matters. And with Neptune, you're thinking about collective consciousness, collective awareness, the globe as a whole, and really bringing in this much bigger piece, not just your personal responsibility and the even the limits of your society that Saturn might represent, but the bigger picture as well. And it kind of adds, it's a little bit mind blowing, right? With Neptune there, it's almost like we can't quite grasp what it means because it's a big concept.
Mhm.
And especially with it being in Aries, it's this grappling of, who am I? I'm a speck on a speck on a speck,
Mhm.
I'm a tiny little speck. And like, what is but then in that is a liberation as well.
Mhm.
So it's this dance, and this Sagittarius full moon is a celebration of the dance.
Mhm.
And you also have a trine aspect
Yeah,
here
that's
to
beautiful.
Mars, and it does sextile. So you've got this really nice. So a trine is a flow of energy. A sextile is an opportunity should you choose to take it. And this just adds excitement. This adds a fervor. This adds an intensity, or real need to act. So it's not just a quiet celebration. It's a, hey, let's have a party.
Yeah.
Really, let's take it to another level.
It really brings in active playfulness, physical playfulness, active playfulness.
Yes.
Light that big bonfire and dance around it and have some
Yeah.
stories and some laughs and
And take a risk. This introduces more risk, doesn't it?
yeah,
Like, and I
yeah,
mean the risk of being vulnerable, the risk of sharing something that maybe you wouldn't have shared publicly a year ago or 2 years ago, but this is
right. You
the
might be
time.
telling a joke that somebody around that campfire doesn't think is too funny.
Be
But it could
careful of it.
open up some really important and significant conversations and, really have value to take
Yeah.
those risks. I like that.
Yeah. So, any last comments?
I don't think so.
Uh,
Sometimes we talk about the traveling that the moon has done since the new moon, and that can be interesting to look at. Since the new moon, the moon has traveled over Jupiter and Mercury and Mars, so it's just gathered up all of what we've already been talking about. It doesn't
yeah.
really add anything there, except
I
to
guess
think that that last planet it picked up was Mars. It's like, oh,
yeah.
got
That's
that
really carrying
energy.
that.
Yeah, it's really carrying that.
Yeah. The only other thing I'll say is just notice that Venus is now in Taurus. It's been here for a few days now.
Mm.
This adds a stability to the situation, to some, well, I'm not sure stability is the right word. It adds an earthiness. Let's
Yeah.
put it that way. Does it? Because
A
I was,
sensuality.
yeah, because Venus did
Yeah.
just square Pluto not long ago, so that stirred it up. But it does add a physical piece to it, and maybe even what you're saying, like the physicality of the active playfulness. This also brings in the something about the body and the
Oh,
enjoyment of that
great
massage,
sex.
pleasure.
Great sex.
Yeah, you there
Yeah,
you go.
there you have it. All
All
right.
right, we're done. We can finish this video. Okay, well, do you want to move on to the
Yeah, let's just
next?
move on. I think
All
we're
right, I think we
ready.
covered it. Okay, so we're going to start with here, right to Aries rising.
So, for those of you with Aries rising, you come into the world with such a directive, your personality is so ready to party. Yeah, you've got such dynamic energy in yourself. And here at this powerful full moon, what is really being lit up is your ninth house, your worldview, your higher understanding. Um, all of that is what's lit up. Now, over the last, since May 20th, May, April 20th,
No, May, that's right.
sorry.
Funny, but it's true.
Since Gemini season began, you have been gathering information in that third house. You've been really thinking about how to use your voice, how to open up and develop your own voice. And here at this full moon, there's really that idea of bringing some playfulness into your worldview, speaking it for all to hear. It's really a celebration of the voice you bring to your worldview.
Hmm. Yeah. And there's an added impetus here to really fold in your creativity, like get super playful and you know, think outside the box, like do something fun and really exciting and think of it in the veins of like giving of yourself, a just an unbridled giving of love at the Sagittarius full moon that really just adds a level of excitement and ignition to the whole situation here. So that's kind of that's where all the flow and the fire is. There is also just the idea of really wanting to connect. In your case, nourishing the bonds with your family is going to be a really important way to celebrate this. And that's not without its trials and tribulations. I mean, of course, there's always tension in our families to some degree somewhere. And the idea here is to just embrace it and welcome all that. Like that's part of it. It's part of your growth. It's part of your evolution. It's part of your wisdom. So this is a warts and all full throttle celebration.
I
um,
imagine this one as the humor that you bring to these family celebration conversations is going to be very self-deprecating humor.
yeah.
With
Yeah.
Saturn and Neptune just having moved into your first house, there's that idea that you're really looking at yourself and learning to understand how you're navigating your own self. So
Yeah.
yeah, deprecating humor.
Okay. Ready to move on to Taurus?
Move on to Taurus.
Okay, so for those of you who have Taurus rising, the Sagittarius full moon lands in your eighth house. And your eighth house is that place where in every single relationship that you're part of, there is a time and a place where you start bumping into each other's baggage. You start bumping into the hidden layers of people's stuff, and maybe especially if you have any kind of intimacy, as you move towards that intimacy, like guess what? There's also these other layers. There's emotional baggage, there's some struggles, there's some fears, things like that. So that's what the eighth house is. And it's interesting thinking that every time anything Sagittarius happens to those of you with Taurus rising, this is what is lighting up is this like this deeper intimate connection that's not the most comfortable. And so for you in particular, this is a really important time to just celebrate all of it, to just say, well, that's being difficult, but you know what? I know myself better now because we're also in Gemini season. And the whole time during Gemini season since May 20th, you've been gathering data, and in your case, this data is probably to do with money. It's to do with, what you value and what value you bring to each and every situation. So you've been gathering all that data, and now faced with whatever this trial and tribulation is with somebody else, you're really getting to see your real worth. Like you're really getting to see where all that data comes together into this deeper meaning of how you handle relationships, what boundaries you set, how you deal with it when other people are having a difficult time and how you handle all that. So, I mean, that's a great thing to celebrate. I think is just
Mhm.
there's so much growth in there for that, so
Mhm.
much addition to your wisdom. So, yeah.
I think about celebrating the shared spaces in that eighth house, where you share money, share resources, share your beliefs. That's part of that eighth house. Yeah, because it's in that sharing that you get to grapple with all the difficulties, of course. But, really thinking about it as something to celebrate. And, with the Mars piece that we talked about, there's a lot of energy that can come from your home and family to support this celebration. There's also a way in which humor really, in your case with Taurus rising, the humor is so much about how you understand your navigation of conversations with others. So
Mm,
make sure that as you're celebrating this way in which you have learned how to set boundaries or learned how to share resources with others can really come through in conversations that really identify the humor involved in that process.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah, I think some of the other layers here too is like this while you're having this good time, hopefully. Part of what you want to think about is nourishing connections with people who are close to you. And when I say close to you, I mean people in your close proximity. So that might be neighbors, that might be siblings. I mean, that can be close friends too at times. But that's where you're really like, as you're sharing these stories, there's a sense of like kind of taking care of those connections, of finding a deeper bond, especially again, I have to say with siblings because this is my sister's. So I'm like, yes. In fact, I just had a great conversation with her today. But anyway, like that's kind of, that may not be you. There might be some other layers in here. But that's what you're thinking about nourishing, and that there might be some bump up, against because we've got Saturn and Neptune that have moved into Aries and are now in your 12th house. So there's something deep in your unconscious that is also being pressed upon during this time. So this to me is um this is a little bit of a tricky one for Taurus rising. Like this is a tricky Sagittarius moon, but I also think that if you can kind of find that celebratory space at this full moon or near this full moon, it's extra rewarding because when you find flow over really tricky terrain, it is enormously satisfying. So there's something about that for this one, to really just dig in and see what you can unearth. So
Yeah. Yeah, using humor in those bumpy places is so important. You're really just beginning a process of understanding some of the deeper levels of your own unconscious
yeah,
and using that beginning understanding to grapple with from the perspective of humor is going to really help you to navigate this lovely Sagittarius full moon.
yeah, dig into your creativity. Think of something fun, maybe a little unusual, that's really creative that will help you really demarcate this full moon as a time for celebration. So
Mm, yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
ready?
Okay.
All
Yeah.
right. So Gemini rising.
Gemini rising. So for those of you with Gemini rising, this is kind of a simple one. We've got the first to the seventh house is what's being impacted here. The bright, shiny full moon is in your seventh house. The sun has been going through your first house since Gemini season began on May 20th. So you've been kind of pretty self-focused for the last few weeks. You've been really gathering information about how other people see you, how you connect with other people in some ways. And here at this full moon, your attention is really riveted by relationship, whether that is your spouse, your partner of some important person in your life. There's really a way in which you're seeing yourself reflected very clearly. And that is really what you're celebrating here, where the conversation comes in, the conversation with which you want to add a good dose of humor is around your own values. And you want to bring that to your partner, play with conversation, and there's a lot in that. There's a lot in that. Your values and how you speak about them with humor is going to really allow you to celebrate in a big way.
Yeah.
I didn't
I think
even talk about the little bumpy challenge here, so I'll let you carry on with
okay.
that one.
This yeah, the kind of the this you're enjoying the celebratory full moon, celebrating partnerships and so on. And part of that is just really being nourishing towards yourself, like making sure that you are really nourishing the way you show up in the world, because that's kind of what you're sharing and is something really important is that you really bring that in. I think nourish really is the key word there. And that nourishing might be a little tricky because of the Saturn Neptune conjunction that is happening in the 11th house in Aries, and it's really just bringing in this tension. And because it's in the 11th house, like some of that tension might be very public. It might be having to do with your groups. Your It could be things to do, and even in your work environment, the community of your work environment. I mean, in essence, there's some pressure coming from community that is really going to bring up this issue of like, yeah, it's a bit stressful and there's some challenges, all the more reason to really just to take a step back and to celebrate all of this, living in this moment. There's an aliveness to the Sagittarius full moon that I just think is so helpful and hopeful and can be full of humor. I really think that that's a big piece.
Yeah.
And also, really just letting that be activated, as Laurie's already mentioned, by your voice, by your humor, by bringing in, being really creative in how you talk to other people and how you show your appreciation and your excitement for all those people that you have some kind of partnership connection with. And that's what it kind of comes down to,
Yeah.
which is nice for Laurie and I because both of our partners are Gemini rising.
Oh, that's right. I wasn't even thinking of that for some strange reason. It's like, oh,
Celebrate us, we're Leos.
celebrate us. But it is interesting thinking about how that conflict happens between the second house and the 11th house. So if you find yourself celebrating with your partner in community, that's going to be a place where you might experience a little bit more tension than if you're not celebrating in
Mhm.
community.
Yeah.
I could go off on a riff, but that would be too personal.
Okay, should we carry on then?
Yeah, let's carry on.
Okay, so those of you who have Cancer rising, the Sagittarius full moon is illuminating your sixth house. Your sixth house really represents all of those practices, those daily habits that you do. Again, I always end up talking about just your exercise habits, how you eat, how you move your body, your sleeping, all of those things. And sometimes the sixth house is not considered necessarily the easiest or most kind of positive place, but I actually really love the sixth house because another thing it really brings in is animals, pets. And that was impressed upon me recently, just this idea of animals and the joy that they bring. And I love that having Sagittarius here is the sign of the centaur. So I do think people with Cancer rising, there's a potential for a nice connection with animals. So if that's the case, that is one of the many things you may want to celebrate during the Sagittarius full moon.
Hmm.
And meanwhile, we are in Gemini season. It's the sun has been in Gemini since May 20th. And we also had the new moon on the 26th. So you've been gathering a lot of data. You've been gathering information about your own subconscious patterns, your own psychology, perhaps your own need for retreat, for maybe embracing solitude in a new way, or perhaps just learning a lot of information about the things that make everything tick. The kind of the underneath nature of things. So that's where Gemini season has your focus there in the 12th house. And at the Sagittarius full moon, it's time to really bring all of that knowledge forwards and let it have more meaning. Let it turn into wisdom that you can apply to
Hmm.
your daily routines, that can really bring an excitement and an enjoyment and a pleasure to the day to day things that, we each have to do, on the regular. So that is a kind of a quick synopsis of the Sagittarius full moon. There are some other players here, and one of them I'll just say is both rulers are in Cancer. Both Mercury and Jupiter are together. They're in Cancer, as we saw in the chart in the beginning. And so this means that this is all about you kind of nourishing yourself, like taking care of yourself, like feeling the connected to yourself, and then see how that connection to self emanates out into your connections with other people.
Hmm.
So as you have that bond with yourself and your intuition, it enables you to open the doors to other people in an interesting way. And I think that is part of the story. um, but that's not easy, and I'll leave that to Laurie to, if you're willing, to
Yeah,
flesh out the story.
it's interesting to think about that just at this full moon, the two rulers there in the first house. And I think they together, Mercury and Jupiter together, really brings up the whole issue of humor and the ability to use humor to kind of calm down some of the stress that's going on currently. And, we are in a difficult time in the world. So it's hard for some of us to think about celebrating without feeling like, how dare I celebrate when the world is burning? But the reality is, we have to celebrate what we can celebrate. And at this time, it's really important for us to kind of rest in this space of humor without ignoring the fact that there are difficulties going on. And some of the things that are really kind of, pushing against you right now is some of the realities and uh, the meaning of the realities that you're facing in the outer world, it possibly through your career, something along those lines. But there's some way in which you just have to rest. This full moon is just a moment in time, and it's really important that you rest in the celebration, that you bring humor to kind of manage some of the difficulties.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's just a lot of energy at the Sagittarius full moon. And some of that energy is, up to you to sort of self-generate, to really get clear about your value, your resources, and apply those to this one, as Laurie mentioned, it's just this one moment in time, but it's so important to have these bright moments,
Hmm.
especially amidst so much difficulty. So yeah, that's awesome.
There you go. Let's move on.
Let's do it.
So, if you have Leo rising, this puts the full moon in your fifth house, bringing in that axis between the 11th and the fifth house, which I love thinking about that axis between the fifth and the 11th. If you think about the fifth house as where we give love, so the celebration of this full moon is around celebrating how you are able to give of yourself, whether that be through relationships of giving love to other people, or whether that be through giving of yourself through a creative path of some sort, or just giving yourself over to fun and kind of a little bit of risky fun. So there's all of that. That's what's being celebrated. Now, over the period of time since the sun moved into Gemini on May 20th, you've been kind of gathering information around how you receive from community, what community means to you, and kind of thinking about this as the community is showing you love received. And you are receiving that and turning the light back around and shining it through your ability to give. I don't know if I said that in a way that made sense, but it made sense to me. But yeah, this is such a time of celebrating, particularly in that fifth house, celebrating how you give love. Obviously, there are challenges in every moment, and this particular one brings up some interesting issues as the ruler of these two is joined together in that 12th house. When Jupiter and Mercury come together, I think a great use of that is humor. How about if it's in the 12th house? What are we going to think about with that, Jenny?
It's tricky, right?
It's
Well, I mean,
tricky.
the
That's
12th
why I turned
house,
it over to you.
I know. I mean, a really simple way to think about this is to think about um, what is your spirituality? Like, what do you
Hmm.
believe about the bigger world? What do you believe about the collective? The collective consciousness, essentially, like Gaia, the theory of this planet being a living organism. I mean, big things like that. And like, this is a time to take those huge concepts and have some fun with them, like have some humor about it. Consider this idea of being, I think what comes to mind is just this idea of like we're just individuals. We're not all that important on a certain level. I mean, on other levels, we're very important, of course. But there's something about perspective, and the 12th house, it surely gives us that massive perspective of like, what are we? A collection of cells. Where do we live in a solar system, in a galaxy, in a universe? I mean, those kinds of there's a lot of cosmic humor available in those. And this is a time to really nourish the self, the unconscious or subconscious patterns through tapping into that enormous picture, that, almost mind blowing, beyond our conception type of picture. Yeah, I think it's just the cosmic joke, just
Yeah.
thinking about that. So,
I
yeah.
love that you brought that up, just the whole idea of like the cosmic humor and with the little challenge at this time with the square to Saturn and Neptune that have just moved into Aries, that joke is really being supported. You can really use that, the reality with which you're beginning to really see and understand the bigger picture. Your worldview is changing. You are just beginning a process of really significant change around your worldview. And that is really playing into this. Okay, how do I work with these big changes that feel difficult? Well, I can work with them by, finding that cosmic large picture humor.
And also, like, I think the ninth house where those two are, it refers to our experiences. So, like, what's your response to your sort of big picture, the cosmic joke idea? Like, what's your response? What education would you like to gather to go further in that direction? Or what experience? Like, what are some things that you want to do while you can, kind of thing? Like, is there a place you want to travel to, or a course you want to take, or it's time to read that book that's been pulling your attention for a while? It's just go for it. It's really that, right? It's that response, and there is tension in it. It's not just, there might feel like a real drive to do something. I've got to do something about this. Can't just enjoy just
But
the
boy,
first, right?
this for Leo rising, this is really a lovely, lovely celebration because
Yeah,
that Mars that trines that moon is in your first house.
yeah,
Go dance. Just play and dance and have a little cosmic joke on yourself or
yeah. I like,
I love
yeah,
that.
yeah, dancing. I want to have a dance party.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to Virgo season. I'm get great. Virgo rising, not Virgo season. I'm not there yet. Okay.
Oh God,
Virgo
no, not yet.
rising. Like, whoops. So those of you Virgo rising, the Sagittarius full moon is illuminating your home and your family life. It's down in your fourth house. And so it's illuminating something that really exists at the very core of your existence. That can be something as solid and real as the home you live in, the concrete building that you live in. But it also can be much more emotional and more about family and the people that you live in that building with or in that home with. And it also can really take you into some much broader ideas of like your whole lineage and ancestry and all that sort of thing. So, whatever it is, that's what the Sagittarius full moon is illuminating, something about all those things. And it really brings in the idea of like having a sense of humor about your family, your upbringing, your
Yeah.
perceived, I know, your perceived lineage, just kind of taking it with a grain of salt. I mean, like, what is the story here? Like, this is such a crazy story that it just is. It's important to laugh and to really bring the humor into it. So that's kind of the first piece. Because we're in Gemini season and the sun has been hanging out in Gemini since the 20th of May. There's been a lot of focus on your work life, your most public life, your professional life, perhaps, or your social reputation. That's where you've been out and about gathering a lot of data, or a lot of data has been coming in at you. There's been a lot of just time spent like, how do I need to push forwards in this area? What supports do I need? What logistical things should I be doing or focusing on? And then now at the Sagittarius full moon, you kind of get to hit the pause button and just celebrate the whole deal. Like, celebrate what your public life, but also your private life, that home life. Like, that's really part of the picture here. And then there's a little bit of well, let's think about the rulers of the two. Mercury and Jupiter are the rulers of Sagittarius and Gemini in reverse order. And those two planets are in your 11th house. So there's something that needs
Wow.
to be done in a public place, right? Like, done out in community. And remember, your communities can be all kinds of things. They can just be the community at your home, they can be community out in public, they can be classes, all sorts of things. So there's something that is there for you to really display that humor, encourage that, go big, and at the same time, be a little tender. to those people in those big groups. So I kind of I like that. I think that's an interesting way to think about where those are. So yeah, what do you have to add, Lord?
Yeah, it's interesting to think about that. I think of, yeah, community is the people that support us to our path forward. So there's some way perhaps of bringing humor into what you're creating for community or where you find yourself in community. And, there's a little bit of a rub against that because you are also in a new process of understanding how you navigate other people's deep issues.
Mm,
And with that, of course, I'm talking about, yeah, the Saturn and Neptune that have just moved into your eighth house. So there's some way where what you're learning about how you navigate other people's deep issues is kind of pushing against this humor or development of your voice in community. There's something in that. There's
mm,
some challenge there, but really you want to find the humor in how you navigate those issues
mm-hmm.
and celebrate, celebrate,
Yes. And
celebrate.
again, it's that
All the
celebrate.
information you've been
Yeah,
gathering out in the world, bringing that information into a wise understanding of celebrating your roots.
nice. Yeah, and there's a lot of energy for this. There's a lot of like, juice to kind of like really in to celebrate this part of your life. But it's really I kind of see it as with, Mars is in Leo right now and it's in your 12th house, but it's in a really nice aspect to these. So it's sort of like just go ahead and bring up all the shit that you've had to learn about yourself that maybe hasn't been the most pleasant. But now's the time to just say, what the hell? This is the human experience. This is the tapestry of existence, and it's a rich life, and it's filled with growth and challenge, and also joy and pleasure and flow. So yeah, that's that.
Interesting. All
All right,
right,
let's move on.
move on.
Libra rising.
Okay, so for those of you with Libra rising, this full moon is landing in your third house. The third house is really, it's about your voice, it's about how you communicate in the day-to-day world of the people in your environment that you didn't choose. I love thinking about it that way. It's your siblings, it's your neighbors, it's your neighborhood. This is the area of the third house. So this is an area that you really want to celebrate. Celebrate those neighbors, celebrate with those neighbors or siblings. For the past, since May 20th, when the sun moved into Gemini, you've been really gathering a lot of information and learning to understand yourself better on the level of higher understanding, on the level of your worldview, bigger picture ideas. So all that you've learned, all that you've been thinking about, gathering information about, in that arena, you're now bringing down into a celebration of how you can use your voice to spin that into wisdom rather than just information. So, it's really an ability here for those of you with Libra rising. There's really an ability to, yeah, spin wisdom through your voice to the people in your day-to-day world. Those The two planets that rule each side of this equation are together in your 10th house. So there's some way that, this is very public for you, and you can really bring this whole idea of wisdom and information and bringing humor and wrapping it into humor and bringing it out in a really public way. There may be a little challenge with your partner when you do that. They might not like your humor.
Yeah,
There's some challenge. You're just beginning a process of developing a different understanding of what relationship means for you.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, and it's like the bigger story or the sort of axis of the joyful moment, the celebration really is seemingly happening in the a little bit less personal part of your life, like out there in your work environment. You can think about if you do have a profession or a career, it's like all the folks at work, basically. It's like that's where, this kind of need to nourish, to find a little bit of a deeper bond with some of those folks, as part of the Sagittarius full moon, or at least that's what that humor is going to bring. And that is a different place than, as Laurie's saying, like the tension that could be coming from the partnership area. But again, remember, like the partnership area, which is the seventh house, and Saturn and Neptune have moved in here. It's your partners, yes, but it's also how you show up as a partner and what you see in the mirror of your partnerships. That's a lot of what is being brought in here. So, you may not be partnered, and that might be, and that's fine. But it's that question. Maybe there's a little bit of a tension that you would prefer to be, or there's something else. But at any rate, there is that pressure between partnership and work in this picture. And all the more reason, really, to just kind of embrace all of it and to say, what the hell? Then bring the partner to the work, to the work party, maybe, or I mean, that might be part of what you do to kind of work with this,
And then
because
that
it's a
Mars is in the 11th, right?
yeah, and there's just like there's a real joy that can come from groups. And I mean, it adds to the picture of just like, yeah, this is a very external
Yeah.
situation here of really just being out there with it in a public way. So yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Interesting. All right, let's move on.
Yeah, okay. So let's go to Scorpio rising here. For those of you with Scorpio rising, the Sagittarius full moon is in your second house. And the second house is one of those funny houses where it's not necessarily the easiest to work through. It's a little bit of a tricky house. And part of that is because it does have to do with the way you value yourself, on the kind of deepest psychological level. So it can bring in some of those hidden issues of like maybe not feeling so good about yourself.
Mm.
And it also can pertain to your finances, your money, your resources on a much more tangible level. So that's where the Sagittarius full moon is illuminating. And you can also imagine sometimes, money can be very uncomfortable to talk about, to deal with. You know, like no matter what your status is with money, it can be a tricky topic.
Mhm.
Topic. So every time you have a Sagittarius full moon, that's what's being illuminated. And this is a really important time to kind of look at the bigger picture. What's the bigger picture of your financial status, your financial issues? And what's the bigger picture of how you sort of extend love to yourself, essentially? Because that's, again, the psychological piece. Now, we are in Gemini season, and the sun has been in Gemini since May 20th. And that really has been illuminating the whole time. Just the way you handle your relationships with other people, the way you handle the deeper layers of the baggage of other people. And it's really that place. In other words, you've been gathering a lot of data and information about the way you handle these connections with other people, the way you set boundaries. If you have any kind
Mm.
of rituals that help support you in managing that, these places where you have to share resources with other people, and really just like working with all of that. And then at this time, at the Sagittarius full moon, you're kind of getting to see the fruits of your labor, like, and how can you show up and celebrate, where you are, like what you have been able to accomplish in these difficult parts of life. And there is a fair amount of support coming for this too. So there's both challenge and the support. And some of the supports have to do with the way you hold wisdom. And that as a Scorpio rising person, you have some intrinsic understanding of the way that emotional bonds and taking care of yourself and others is a source of wisdom. Like you really have an intrinsic understanding of the importance of that. And that is where you really can bring in some humor. You can tell some stories. You can share some, maybe some tales of risk taking, and the, morals of those stories and what has happened. So
Mm.
that's kind of what we're looking at during the Sagittarius full moon,
Mhm.
or some of it.
Some
What do
of
you have
it.
to add?
Yeah. Well, I just think about that stress between it. You bring in the Mercury and the Jupiter that are conjunct in Cancer. So you want to really bring humor around your view of the world and your beginning understanding of how the day-to-day routines of your life are kind of rubbing against the development of bigger ideas. I,
Mm.
I wonder how, I think about how that could be playing out. Just that's getting a little beyond the full moon itself, though. I think
Okay.
really we just want to think about the fact that this is a time of celebration, a time to bring humor around your worldview, and
Yeah.
as you are developing more understanding of your day-to-day routines.
Yeah. I mean, I think, this
I could,
picture. Oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, I go, you go ahead, please.
Yeah. I was
I'm
just
ready
gonna
to run down a rabbit hole somewhere.
Well, I'm picking up a tiny bit on your rabbit holing, but just briefly, what this picture could be at this full moon is that maybe you want to travel somewhere, and it's a bit tricky. It's financially expensive. It messes up your daily routines, and I think what the Sagittarius moon is saying is just shine a light on it. Let it emerge, like celebrate what is, and from that place, if it makes sense and you're like, hell to hell with it, let's buy the plane tickets, or let's plan the road trip, or whatever.
Yeah, or the
It's time to
study.
like go for it.
Or
Yeah.
the study. Yeah. I mean, if you all of a
Yeah.
sudden find yourself in a situation where you want to take some new study and money is a concern, yeah, or travel, those things could certainly play into this. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, it's just like that whole painting this picture through these little 5 minute synopsis, and then you have to think about, if you have Scorpio rising, how do those topics kind of come together? What does it make you think of in your own life? Use your own tuition to kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
understand what that is, and also there's a lot of energy coming from whatever your professional or public life is too, because you've got Mars in Leo cruising through your 10th house. So that's really kind of jazzing up this picture, and creating more action and more excitement, and just more like, hey, let's be really creative in how we take risks, and really turn this into a really celebratory moment of all of those pieces.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's
yeah.
awesome. Okay, let's move on.
Okay. Sagittarius rising.
All right. If you have Sagittarius rising, this is a really personal full moon for you. You want to celebrate in a big way. You really do. The full moon itself is right there in your first house. Since the sun moved into Gemini on May 20th, the light of the sun has been shining in your seventh house. Your focus has probably been a lot on your partners, the people that are most important to you in your life. You've been gathering information about them. You've been having conversations with them, whatever. There's been all this activity around partnership itself. At the moment of this full moon, the light shifts onto you. It reflects on you, and you take everything you have learned about your partnership and bring it into the wisdom of how to expand your understanding of yourself.
Mm.
Because these two, the rulers of the sun and the moon, are together in Cancer, we really know that this shining the light on you is a moment that you can really use your more expansive understanding of the humor that it takes for all of us to navigate those deep issues of partnership. I mean, partnerships, I bet every single person that's listening to us has had a number of partnerships that they have learned how difficult it is to be in partnership. Well, how do we deal with those difficulties? Sometimes the solution and the only way to deal with those difficulties is through humor. And this is a real time, I think, to engage with that humor, to share that humor, and allow yourself to be super playful with that.
Yeah. I know that's so helpful, isn't it? Like, just things can get really intense and heavy, and it's like you've got to find those ways. And I think the Sagittarius full moon is this invitation to find a way to, expand on pleasure, expand on humor, with those close others. And obviously it can look a bunch of different ways depending on whether we're talking about spouses or business partners, or other one-on-one relationships. So I mean, I think that that's a really important part, and it might feel it could feel a little heavy-handed with that square between, the Jupiter and Mercury together in Cancer squaring, Neptune and Saturn. There might be heavy-handedness, like you might feel like, oh, yeah, but the lover part of my marriage is over, and it's not necessarily, because it kind of brings in that this like the heaviness where you want there to be a bit more of a brightness, and the solution here is to go for the brightness, go for the humor, go for the story, go for the optimism, because this brief moment in time, the Sagittarius full moon, it's just such an invitation to kind of howl at the moon, break it down, like, have a dance. Like, it really kind of brings in that sort of thing. In particular, when you're all of this, I guess what I want to say is all of this can bring in a deeper bonding with those intimate ones. It can bring in this deeper level of bonding that is deep, but also lighter in its own funny way. So I think that some of that and all of this together can be really just to be a big eye opener in terms of your worldview. Like, wow, I can still
Yeah.
kind of bring in the fun of the lover feeling into this more serious relationship, right? I mean,
And with Mars in the trine aspect to it, being in your ninth house, it might be just an awesome time to take off and go on a trip, expand your connection with your partner through travel or through taking a class together or whatever it is.
yeah, that's great.
Go to a demonstration.
Activism,
Yeah,
awesome. Make a humorous sign.
yeah, yeah.
So,
Okay.
okay, let's move on to Capricorn rising. So those of you with Capricorn rising, this full moon in Sagittarius is in your 12th house. And that 12th house is such an interesting place because it really refers to these big picture topics like collective consciousness and your spiritual ideas, or not even your ideas, but your spiritual knowing, would be another way to put it. And it can kind of get into our deeper psychological processes. It's that need to turn inward to kind of understand how to transcend some of the minutia of your life in order to have a bigger picture view, a bigger, broader perspective. And with Sagittarius here, I think that humor is vitally important in general for Capricorn rising. Humor is
Mhm.
so important to uplift really uplift your whole view of everything, the connectedness of all things. So really, really helpful to have humor here. And during Gemini season, which began on May 20th, the sun is being in Gemini, going through your sixth house, which really suggests this idea of gathering information, like figuring out your social supports in the area of life that refers to your routine. So this might be like finding that person that you wanted to play pickleball with, or that
Oh,
team, or
God.
or connecting with somebody to go on a walk, or it might be that you just need more information about your diet. So there's all kinds of things that sun in the sixth house means. And now at this Sagittarius full moon, there's this idea that you can kind of turn all that into this meaning, like this deeper, broader meaning, like the nuts and bolts of your life has meaning. It's part of a bigger tapestry. It's part of the richness of life. And this is a really great moment in time to remember all that and to really have a sort of celebration about all of that. I mean, I think that that's part of this. And when you think about the fact that Mercury and Jupiter, which rule Gemini and Sagittarius, they are together tightly in Cancer in your seventh house, it adds in this layer of partnership. Like find someone really to have this laugh with, this one-on-one person that you treasure and trust, and really just bring that in and feel the way it kind of strengthens the bonds, between you, or strengthens your understanding of what it feels like to connect with another person on that level. So,
And
yeah.
yeah, humor is so important, especially the more I think about this, the more, it's like the humor is really important given the square aspect to the planets that have just moved into your fourth house. For those of you with Capricorn rising, it's almost like there may be some sort of a challenge between you and a partner around Maybe one of you wants to move from where you're living right now, and the other one's saying no, or, something around your home or family that there's a little bit of a conflict, brewing conflict between you and a partner. um, Bring humor in at this full moon. Work with that difficulty through humor. We can manage a lot of challenges in our life if we just give it a little humor on top of it. For some people that doesn't work real great, but for most of us, it can be an awfully helpful way to navigate difficulties.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's
Yeah.
super helpful. Yeah, okay. Well, anything else you want to add?
I don't think so.
Mm,
No, that's
yep.
plenty. Let's go on.
Let's move on. Okay, let's move to Aquarius rising.
So, for those of you with Aquarius rising, this bright, shiny, playful, fun, and humorous full moon is falling in your 11th house. 11th house is really about the community that supports you. We can think of it as the house of friendships, but it's not necessarily friends. I feel like friends are kind of a different category, although there's often a lot of overlap. But the community, the 11th house, is the community that supports you to your desires. So you want to think that that's where the celebration of this full moon is. Since May 20th, when the sun moved into Gemini, we've been really developing information and gathering information and data around your fifth house. So you've been thinking a lot about how you give of yourself, what your creative processes are, what your relationships are with your children or your lovers. This is an area that has had a lot of your curiosity since the beginning of Gemini season.
Mm,
Now, at this point of the full moon, you want to think about all of that information that you've gathered and see where it aligns with the community that in turn supports you. And it's that community that your giving of yourself is reflecting back to you. That's where you really have this great opportunity to celebrate. And
mm,
where we bring in the whole conversation of humor is because the two rulers, the ruler of the sun in Gemini and the moon in Sagittarius, Mercury and Jupiter, are very closely conjunct in Cancer right now. Jupiter has just moved into that sign, and incidentally, watch the Jupiter in Cancer video. But there's really those two planets together bring in this whole idea of humor and just using your voice to, levitate things a bit, bring some humor and ease to whatever the situation, the stress is at this time. So we know there is a stress. We talked about it in the early part of the video. And I'm going to turn that stressful part over to Jennie to talk about.
all the stress.
All the stress, you talk about the
Yeah.
stress. I wanted to talk
Yeah.
about the fun and expansion.
Yeah, and it's funny because yeah, there is the stress that Laurie's referring to. I mean, first of all, it's like you've got this real need to nourish the self on the day-to-day level, on the day-to-day routines, like just finding that connectedness with other people, like making sure that you feel really connected to your own emotions, and there's some kind of stress that's coming from possibly your immediate environment in some way, that is preventing that calm, nourishing desire that you really want, and it's something is stirring you up. Maybe it's on a deeper psychological level. It could be that you feel this real, sense of urgency around it's your turn to speak up. Like you need to, take responsibility and use your voice to speak up for things that you don't think are right. And that's kind of messing up your tranquility a little bit. I mean, on the other hand, it could be more external. It could be that there's a neighbor who's bothering you. There could be a neighborhood situation, construction, or problems next door that are really kind of pissing you off and affecting your ability to really just be like, wait a minute, I'm annoyed by this. I don't want to. This isn't funny, And so you got to think about where is that tension in your life. Your story might be a bit different, whatever it is, but nonetheless, the astrology really suggests a tension here, and it's the kind of tension that is forcing you to grow, but it's also forcing you to dig in a little bit and find what's funny about it. See if you can connect. If you do have an annoying neighbor, see if you can connect through humor. See if there's a way that you can kind of ease the about it by finding that humor, because that's what the Sagittarius full moon, even just by itself, is all about. And when you add in all these other layers, it's like, no, this really is a moment of celebration. This is a moment to act on a feeling of being able to kind of be in a one-on-one space with somebody too, and really kind of connect with them on a more of a kind of yeah, like a one-on-one level than you have been able to before. So there's a lot here that's really jazzing up this picture, that's really saying, hey, just really have a sense of celebration with those groups that the 11th house represents, where the full moon is. And this is just a, warts and all, embrace all of it, embrace the conflict, the struggle, and just find that joy that really emanates anyway. So it's kind of the message. Anything else you
Sounds
want to add?
good.
Yeah. Okay. And the
Moving
last
on.
but not least, Pisces rising. Where do you have this full moon, little Pisces? Or big Pisces? Okay. So you have it in the 10th house. The 10th house, in a nutshell, is the most public house in the whole system. For a lot of people, that's your profession. For other people, it's more of a social thing, more of a social reputation. So it's one of those, and that's where the full moon is really illuminating, essentially just saying, hey, you got to bring some humor. Take the Sagittarius light, that lantern, and find the humor, whatever it is, in that very public place. Now, you've had all this time since the sun has been in Gemini, so not a ton of time, but since May 20th, where the sun has been in your fourth house. And this is a symbol for this kind of gathering and collecting of data. This idea of gathering up all this information, at the very roots of your being, in your home life, maybe from family members. They're helping you kind of gather up some data, some information. And at the Sagittarius full moon, you can kind of take all of that, those bits of data, and turn them into this, like, uniform sense of meaning. Like, what does all this data mean, and how can it really bring a sense of joy and celebration and optimism, instead of just being kind of separate into sort of like meaningless bits of data. So that's kind of the task that lays before you. And meanwhile, the rulers of Gemini and Sagittarius, so Mercury rules Gemini and Jupiter rules Sagittarius, and they are tightly together in Cancer. They're in your fifth house. So this is a really, I really like this
Yeah.
symbol. To me, this kind of brings in this childlike energy, this like joie de vivre, like let's celebrate that we're being alive, and the connection, the bondedness that can really engender that feeling of fun and playfulness as well, and really leaning into that and letting that kind of flood into this whole picture of doing this celebratory full moon business in this very public place in the 10th house. So I like
Yeah.
that.
I like that too. The little challenge there
However,
is coming from the second house. So, there might be a little voice in your head that says you can't afford to whatever, take the time off to celebrate, or you can't afford whatever you need for this celebration, or you don't deserve it in some way. You just have to manage that. That's really all there is. You have to manage that little voice in your head that doesn't really want you to celebrate as much as you need to. And in order to navigate that internal voice, lean on the humor. It's kind of funny how our internal voices tell us we don't deserve to have fun. So however that shows up for you, really understanding that it's just a moment in time, and it's a moment to really bring your understanding of the bigger picture of things and how humor can support moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and also you've got Mars cruising through your sixth house in Leo. It's really jazzing up that area of routines and day to day, all the things that you have to do on the daily basis. And I think there's a little bit of a message there of like, carrying that joy forwards. Like you have the Sagittarius full moon and kind of keep it going in that day to day routine place. That's going to really help you in the coming weeks. So just, stick that feather in your cap to remind you to continue with that. Get creative about how to keep the joy alive, the flame alive on a more daily basis. I think it could be really helpful. So,
Absolutely. I like
okay.
that. I think we're
All
done.
right. We done.
I think we're done. Well, thank you, Jenny. Thank you for those of you who are watching us, and we'll
Yes.
do it again soon.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.